Okay, so as always, I'll try and do a screen recording, and I find this people love these because even if you were in class, you can always circle back and review a section. Maybe if I went through it a little quickly, you can kind of. So I find I'm getting lots of traffic on these playlists. What I've done now is I put a list. I mean the playlist for this class is there's when you go to Learning Modules in Blackboard, which I've activated, so you should have access to. Let me know if you don't have access to this Blackboard shell. Okay. Sometimes not often. Sometimes it happens. You can go to you can find the playlist at the top of the Learning Modules screen, or I put a direct link in here that takes you directly there as well. So one of two ways to get there. Okay. Right now I've got all of for the most part, the lessons captured from last winter, and what I do is I'll just bump them off as I replace them with this winter's, because things change a little bit and some of the syntax changes, and so the things we do are a little different. We'll do a few things differently than of course last year. But I leave the old ones up, and sometimes I leave them up as well if there's a part that I covered that I don't know, for whatever reason it's pretty cool. I don't know. So there you go. So we'll do that the same thing there. Let's take a look at so the announcements also, any important stuff about, geez, maybe there's a class canceled, or I'm offering, maybe there's an extension to an assignment. It'll all be up there, so please check your student email. That's the only way I have of getting in touch with you, okay? So plug into Office 365. I'll spin you through. I'm going to kill this light up here. So the syllabus. It's kind of my own kind of solution to this, to the course outline. So the course outline is what is the curriculum. So download a copy of this, throw it in a file, back that up, print a hard copy in, put in binders. It's really important that you grab your syllabi and your course outlines for future, for building, customizing a CV for that dream job you've got, or for updating your LinkedIn, or whatever else might replace LinkedIn in a few years. I don't know, right? You want to have this record because you're going to forget a lot of the nuance or the very specific nuts and bolts of what you actually took. So keep these as records also for prior learning. If you go back and schooling will probably be part of your life in one way or another for your entire life, I hope. And sometimes you can take advantage of prior learning and get credit for education you've taken in the past if you have the outlines and the syllabi and the records, because they change and it's a pain to come back 10 years later and try and get an old syllabi or a course outline. It's going to be difficult to get, and it may cost you money. So to hang on to these, print them out, save them. They're worth money to you. Okay? We'll continue to draw on so you don't have to buy a new textbook. This is the HTML5 CSS3 8th edition Visual Quick Start Guide. So I'll be picking away at some of the chapters in there for quizzes and for some content. There's some really good CSS stuff in there. So that will be that's the only kind of textbook resource, but I will direct you toward some other resources as well as we go along. I'm still trying to figure out what my office hours are going to look like this term, given some of the other projects I've got on my desk. So I'll announce that online. And again, so how am I going to be successful in the course? I don't know. I think showing up has tremendous value. I'm just kind of call me old-fashioned, I guess. I think showing up is pretty cool. Coming out and playing along, playing my game. I designed these classes so that they're an in-class experience. I think a lot of you come here for that, right? And you enjoy it. So I like that. So I design it that way. It's the screencasts are there for if you miss a class, and you're adults. I mean, it's your choice to come or not. But I think you really miss out if you don't show up. Ask for help if you need it, and ask for help early. If something's not making sense, something's not clicking, get in touch with me. If you think it would be helpful to get a peer tutor, some of our most successful students have used to take advantage of our peer tutoring, where we get a student who's, they may have a particular talent in one specific area, they share, and you can take advantage of that. Having some of their time every other week. And if you feel like you want to offer some of your time, we will pay you to be a peer tutor as well. So consider that if you can make the time. How am I going to get good grades in this class? Well, let's figure out what am I going to offer so that you can get grades. So there are going to be some in-class exercises, or what I'm starting to call labs now. So I'm kind of trying to remove some of that in-class verbiage. But so labs in class will be worth 20%. So a significant amount of work will be done in class, and those labs will be last term was a little bit of an anomaly because of the strike situation, right? Where I kind of offered an open amnesty on labs and said, if you'll do it, I'll give you the credit. We're going to normalize that now, so you have the week to do the given lab until the next week. So the lab will close for submissions prior to the next class. So you have the day, of course, and then the remainder of the week to do the lab. After that, I just shut the lab down. 3 assignments, 2 projects, and also quizzes, right? So so there's no test per se, but I'm going to kind of query you on kind of what kind of little bits you've collected, pearls of wisdom you've collected through the term. What are we going to cover? What are we going to talk about? So here's the scheduled activities week by week. Oh, I should remove that midterm break, because this, well, there's sort of a break, but it's kind of, it looks a little different. Anyway, so there still are 14 weeks. There's no presentation either. I got to remove that. Anyway, okay, don't worry about that. Don't sweat that part. The quizzes kind of more or less replace that. So this is kind of the ground that we're going to cover. The idea here is we're going to get more comfortable using CSS to sculpt out and to structure and to control interfaces. So how do I use this CSS as a design language to really build stable, robust layouts that look great, right? That leverage things like your typography skills and color schemes, and so you're really well prepared when you get into the workplace. Someone hands you a corporate style guide, and you can say, yeah, I could build some interfaces, I could build a contact form, or I could build a navigation menu that upholds this corporate style guide and looks good, right? Makes you look sharp. So we really have to begin to learn how to leverage CSS and see what some of the new features of CSS, because it's the support for some of the new stuff like CSS, like grid and Flexbox and things like this, multi-column layouts. The support is coming along really, really quickly, and part of that is your phone, right? The browsers on these phones they're reasonably up to date, and they have very good support for all this stuff. So this has been a really good thing. Is the browser in your pocket has helped us out quite a bit. We're going to look at so layout, interoperability. How do I, as with my HTML, how do I build CSS and HTML, basically front end stuff that build it once and use it everywhere? I don't want you forking your code and building 2, 3, 4 different versions of an app just because of some weirdness in IE or Mozilla, right? So how do we do it? How do we build this stuff so it's super smart and we can build one tight piece of code that functions really, really well? And if the user has a terrible browser and it just falls apart on us, how can we at least offer them a usable experience that is fine? So we talk about layout. We'll do a little bit with images and color. And then enhancements and effects with CSS. So what are some of the other things that we can do with CSS that move us kind of almost into more of a vector editing kind of arena, which is pretty cool. Because in the past we used to rely heavily on things like Illustrator or Photoshop to produce graphics, bitmaps, where now we can just build these with these effects like transparencies and drop shadows and things like that with with CSS right there in the browser. And the rendering's fast. What about common interface components? So common user interface nuts and bolts, bits and pieces that that we're going to need. How do we build this? We're going to learn how to build them from scratch. Are you going to, once you get out into kind of production, building things for your boss, for clients, are you going to be building everything from scratch? No. But you need to understand how to build it from scratch. So if you're working with a design framework and you break it, you know how to crack open the hood and fix it. Also, if you know how to build something really well yourself, that doesn't mean you should for a project, because that'll probably take too long. Use a visual framework, but it will help you, it will give you the ability to be able to select from a number of perhaps different frameworks, and be able for you to look at them and say, well, I think this one's better than this one because, right? Or this one might be more suitable for this particular project because, it gives me maybe better access to, or the output, the CSS output that it generates is cleaner and it's easier on bandwidth. You can make those informed decisions without knowing the underlying technology that powers this stuff. You can't make those thoughtful decisions, right? So it's going to be really helpful to know we need to build this stuff from scratch, and it's fun. It's really cool when you get these things working, and the old things are sliding and clicking, and everything's just kind of fits into place. You're kind of like, wow. Like I did that. Like with characters on the screen, I punched in, I built this code by hand, and there it is, working and functioning. It's really cool, right? It's very empowering. So we're going to look at, again, looking more toward the touch environment and mobile, taking more of a mobile-first approach. Let's not consider the mobile people second-class citizens, right? Let's consider, well, more often than not now, someone's going to be hitting up your web app on this, not what you have in front of you. You'll use that to build it. They'll consume it with this. That's really important, right? That requires a bit of a shift in gears mentally. And other things like forms, right? Forms, man, they have to look good. They have to be laid out so they make sense and they're easy to use. We have to do that for people. Tables. We didn't talk too much about tables in our fundamentals class. But tables are incredibly powerful. If they're built properly, they can do all kinds of great stuff from a UI perspective, and they can look fantastic and do really neat things. So we'll look at that, and of course, the tail end. Usually, 14 I leave as an open lab. I might change that. I might fold in something new and interesting that I'm always following new developments and kind of the CSS side of things. So. I might do that. I might leave it open, or I might deliver something else that might be of interest. So here you go. That's the ground we're going to cover. So download and save that for sure. Also, here's the link to the course outline. So go ahead as well on your machine. I might as well do this right now. Hit the old print button, and then you could print using the system dialog, and you can. No, I don't want to print it. You can just go File, Save As. I think Control. Does Windows 7 do this? Let's see. No, it's going to output the HTML. Cancel. Usually your print dialog will have a Save to web. Save the printer.
Yeah.
Save to OneNote. Oh, okay. All right. There we go. Save as PDF. Thank you. That'll do the trick. So nab that and keep it seriously for all your courses. Keep them in a binder. Print out a hard copy too, because like I'm saying, these are worth money. They are cash in your pocket. I swear. If you do this, you'll be so glad that you did. If you don't, you'll be swearing because you'll be like, I got it now. I got to find this, this crazy old outline. Now I got to go back to school 10 years later. They're going to charge me, whatever to look it up, and don't bother with that. This is your curriculum. Here's a system syllabus addendum for evaluation or evacuation, lockdown, sexual violence, and campus closure. So some interesting safety stuff. Please take the time to read that. I won't go over that today, but and we may have a fire drill and or some other kind of a simulated lockdown this year, just to make sure people are familiar with the process, so you know that if there is an emergency where there is a threat to human safety, we are prepared, and we have thought this through to best ensure everyone's well-being. Here's the companion site for the textbook. Oops. So you can grab snippets of code from there. We're only going to be using about maybe 30% of this textbook. The lion's share we use for our HTML, but we'll head back to this, refer back to this for little things. Today we're going to use a little snippet of code from there. And then of course our W3C CSS validation service. So just like we validated our HTML, yes, you can check that the syntax and the structure of your CSS is indeed valid. That doesn't mean that validation is a goal in and of itself, but it does mean this is a good quality tool for you. So get used to, save that to your bookmarks. Off you go. That's cool. Here's my contact information. No? My instructor link doesn't work. That's weird. Oh, it's still trying to run. Here we go. Oh, I did it. I broke Blackboard. I brought it down. Anyone else having a Blackboard? Yeah? A little bit of connectivity? All right. That's all right. Okay. Well, I'll wait for that to spin around. I'm going to download see if I can access my Dropbox. Is it just Blackboard or is it general connectivity? Looks like Blackboard. No, so we've got Blackboard problem. Okay, that's all right for now. We don't need Blackboard right away. What I'll do is let's head over to. You can put your feet up, sit back, and enjoy a PowerPoint slide deck here. We'll talk about selectors. And this, so this slide deck I've thrown up in the Blackboard for you, so you don't need to take notes if you don't want to. All right, so CSS selectors. So it's really important to have a good idea about how do I nab and get hold of a certain piece of piece of content or data or something in my HTML? So the selector is the way by which we name and identify the things that we want to style. So before we can even talk about styling things at all, we need to be able to know that we can point to the specific piece of information, the paragraph or a heading or an aside or something that we can style. If we can't identify it, or we can't tell the browser how to make it look a certain way. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a number of different types of selectors. We have name selectors, ID or class selectors, contextual selectors, pseudoclasses, structural pseudoclasses, negation pseudoclasses, kind of weird, pseudo elements. That sounds bizarre. Combinators for both children and siblings. Also going to talk about attribute selectors. Okay. So first we'll start off with the simple name selector, and some of you had some of the work you guys submitted at the end of the term. I was actually very, very impressed with your CSS work. I think you know, despite a challenging semester, I saw some great work there. I saw you guys really forge ahead, try and use some of these more advanced methods of naming and identifying things in your CSS. I was really impressed. I haven't seen that from a semester, from a first year class out of fundamentals. I don't think yet. I'm really, really impressed with the caliber of work. So you guys can, you know, tip of the hat to you. Well done. Let's make you better. Okay. So name selectors. No trick, right? But it's important to understand, though, that if you just use a selector like P, this means indiscriminately any paragraph element on this document, right? Inside the document object model. So it's important to recognize that sometimes that we have to be a bit more specific. If we're using an ID selector, okay, there are two approaches, right? So if we wanted to, we could put an ID equal intro on any. An ID is a universal attribute, right? You can put that on anything. But so this selector will work on anything, but this one will only work if it's attached to a paragraph, right? You can still, even if this is what you want to target, you can still use that. This is just more specific. Okay, so this will win the specificity war in terms of the CSS cascade, the second one there. So that's just, it's okay. I oftentimes, and this is just my approach, and maybe I'm just adding more code, but I find there's only ever going to be one element with that particular ID value. It's like a serial number. It's not like a class, right? I find the second way of doing things more readable, because then I know if I'm looking at the CSS, I know to go, when I'm looking at the HTML template, I know to go hunting for a paragraph element. It just gives me a bit more information. I tend to use that versus there's nothing wrong with using the one on top, though. Just so long as you know. That's just the way I approach it. I like to make code. Sometimes making code more readable means making it heavier in terms of bandwidth. It means there's more weight. So there's always that trade-off between super readable code and super fast to download code, right? There are server-side technologies. Sometimes you're going to see linearized code, where instead they remove all the formatting and put every single selector and declaration and everything all in one line, line one, right? That's almost impossible to read. But, you know, so there are server modules that will take that formatted code and then optimize it for transit over a network. But let's learn how to build readable code first. Class selectors. Right? So there's no tricks. The same thing applies here, though, if you have, but a little bit less so with classes, because you could put a class, a class error, for example, could be if you have a form, they could make multiple errors on the page, in which case your JavaScript, you're going to attach class error to maybe 2 or more label elements, for example. So you probably find yourself doing this more than being specific about an element. Again, it depends, right? The second one's more specific. So if we're looking about winning that specificity war. Okay, so when we combine the selectors, this is tricky. And I see people kind of, I've been tripped up by this before. So what this means is that any element contained inside a section. So this section element could contain inside it a div, and inside that div could be the H1. This would still work, right? Just because there's another node in between the section and the H1, this still works. All this means is any H1 that is a descendant of a section element. Okay, sometimes that's a bit tricky because very often, you may use other elements to kind of further break up. If it's a large section element, you might have different, who knows how you're going to break it up. But so that just means it's a descendant thereof. It could be a grandchild, a great-grandchild, a great-great-grandchild. Doesn't matter. We'll come back to, if you want to define it, something that's directly a child element, we'll come back to that. In the same way, this EM element, like there could be inside that H2, there could be, say, a span element, and then the M is inside the span, which is inside the H2. This would still work. This would still target that particular M element. So all this is saying, any EM that is a descendant of an H2, that itself is a descendant of a header. And the trick with CSS is not to be as specific as you possibly can. It's to be only as specific as you need to be to get the job done. If you're always trying to be very, 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 very specific about, then what happens is it becomes, what we do is we break the cascade. We make it difficult to kind of win out over our rules where there might be an exception later on. So we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot, so to speak. So only be as specific as you need to be, but no more specific. Then just walk away. Your job is done in terms of the selector, then focus on writing the styles to make said element look in such and such a way. Group selectors. And I saw many of you quite happily using these in your work. So, but this allows you to save code. If you have a number of declarations, properties and values that are the same for all three of these headings, just write them once. Throw them in a group selector. Right? This is dry at its best. Don't repeat yourself. Right? Let's not get. I don't know if any of you ever had carpal tunnel syndrome. You ever had a run-in with that? That's painful, right? That comes from typing too much. So this, hopefully, is going to prevent you from typing too much and injuring yourself. CSS can get very big. You can get into thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of code, right? I don't want you to write a lot of CSS. I love CSS, but don't write a lot of it. Write as little of it as you can, right? So let's work smart, not hard. That's the idea. So things like this, group selectors, absolutely. And if I'm going to look at your code, and if I see duplications of chunks of CSS, I'm going to say, hey, why are you typing this again and again and again? You're just wasting bandwidth and effort. Put it in a group selector. Save yourself the hassle. Pseudo classes. That's weird. Why pseudo? It's kind of a weird, strange word, right? I know what a class is. You add a class to an element. You can add multiple classes to an element even, separated by spaces, but pseudo. So a pseudo class means like sort of a class, but not really, but kinda. You know what I'm saying? So where we're getting at is a good example for pseudo classes might be the link hyperlinks. So you have an anchor element, but the anchor element can exist in a number of states. So it can be either a link that someone has not yet clicked on. So this is called what's called an unvisited link. So I could put a class equal unvisited, but that's not your job as the person making the HTML. You're not going to type that because you don't know. You don't know whether it's been visited or not. That's something that happens once your HTML is done and said. is said and done and delivered over the network, and it resides on the end user's machine. They're going to then interact with it. So I don't know whether it's been visited or unvisited in terms of styling it differently. Right? So that's why we call it a pseudo class. So what happens, we need to leave it to the browser to add and remove these classes, sort of, on our behalf. Right? If a link has been visited, it's already in the user's history, then we type a:visited, and then we can make those. They're already the default style sheet already turns them kind of a nasty purple color, right? So there's a default style sheet for the class visit or the pseudo class visited. I'll come back. I'll skip one for a reason. Hover. So we want to change the display perhaps of a link when someone's mousing over it. We do that by specifying the hover pseudo class, and we can use this more than just links. I can put a hover pseudo class on a paragraph, on a div, on a span, on an aside, anything, right? And it will. We can then apply different styles when there's some sort of hover with the mouse pointer over it. Active. So when something is being clicked upon, but before the button is released. So this is just on click, basically, is the active state. Right? And you'll notice when you click a link, you ever done that? You clicked on a link and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have clicked on that. It's a bad idea. And then you kind of like drag it off the link and release it and hope it didn't follow. You know? They designed that for a reason that way, right? Because we have second thoughts. So the active pseudo class only fires when the link is clicked on, but before it's released, right? There's actually a fifth. And this is called the focus pseudo class. So that's when focus is a bit weird. It's a bit weird to kind of describe. But if you hit the tab key, so if you can imagine that you didn't have the benefit of a mouse pointer on in a desktop context, you hit the tab key, you see there's oftentimes like a little blue or a dotted thing that kind of moves through the document. That's for navigating the interface without a pointer. And then so you tab over to it. So that dotted means that element has focus. And if that has focus and you hit enter, you're in effect clicking on said element, right? By clicking on something, you bring that element into focus, right? For example, you click on a form field, it kind of glows, that it has a different kind of color often in some operating systems, and then that field has focus, right? Now we put these as an aside. We put these in a certain order, okay? And we put them in a certain order because of the CSS cascade. For example, if I put the visited after the hover in my CSS, and the person has visited that link, the hover won't work anymore, right? Because it's later, so that the color of the link won't change. So I have to put it in this order because I always want active or hover to override focus, visited, or link, right? So if you think about this, and there's a way to remember this one. Star Wars fans will like this one. So when you're styling hyperlinks, and this could be for adding or removing underlines or background colors or colors of text, Lord Vader's former handle Anakin. How's that? Okay. So yeah, I found that's the best way to remember the order of those things. So if you're punching in pseudo classes for links, this is just for links. I'm just using this because this is a very common example, but pseudo classes they allow you to style the state of things without having to manually put a class on an HTML element, which in this case you really can't. Structural pseudo classes. What time have we got? 3:43. Okay. Structural pseudo classes. What are we talking about here? All right. So this is where we can talk about the order in which things might appear in the markup. So maybe I want to target the fourth of an element, the fourth paragraph in a section. Well, I don't want to go into my HTML and go class equal fourth right in my markup, right? That's just a waste of code, and that's nuts and crazy. But I can talk about things, I can target things in my code just based on where they are in relation to other things in the page, which is super cool. So for example, if I have 4 list items, I can say grab the fourth of those, of a set, and do something interesting with it. So I don't have to put a class on the fourth li. That's really important. And I see this, I see so much production web code where people just hammer in tons of IDs and classes, and they wrap things with extra divs, within extra divs, within extra divs, and you're like, holy cow, look at all this code. And when you really dig into it, the only reason people put all those extra tags and classes and IDs was they wanted to put a background color of yellow on this specific one, and you're like, why don't you just do that? And just leave it as a simple list. And then you've got simpler markup, and you've got simpler CSS. And by extension, as we'll see a little bit tomorrow, you can have simpler JavaScript, right? It's really easy and you'll find yourself doing this from time to time. It's really easy to build a monster. By building a monster, I mean you make things so horribly complicated, and when things go wrong, you fix that by adding more code onto your already complicated code, and it just becomes a beast, right? And it's human nature. We do it, right? That's how we solve problems. We add more, but you add complexity onto this. So this allows us to write less HTML, less CSS, and to some degree, some less JavaScript. Less is more. What, really? We're in computer studies and you're talking about writing less code? Yes! The least amount of code you can write to get a job done. That's what you want, right? So this is good. So structural pseudo-classes. We can do something programmatic with this as well. So we can say, oh, I would like to do every fourth element in a set, right? That's interesting, right? Rather than going to every fourth one and putting a class something on every fourth list item, just do that, 4n. That means, every time, multiples of 4, 4th, 8th, so on and so forth, right? We can even do something crazy. We can say, yeah, I want the fourth list item, every fourth item, but I want to start at the third one. Or no, sorry, I want to start at the fifth one. So this means every fourth list item, I don't want to say change the background color yellow, but I want to offset it by 1. So I'll start with the fifth, and then go 4 from there to the 9th, and then go to the 13th. Right? Or I can put minus. So you're thinking, why would anyone need to do anything so crazy? Right? You will come up with situations where you need to do these things. It allows you to do that, talk about the HTML without having to put in all these crazy classes and IDs and divs inside your code. Right? If you understand these selectors, although it looks more complicated, when you understand what they do, it allows you to write simpler, more powerful code. We can use plain English too. We don't have to do crazy formulaic stuff inside the selector. We can just say every odd or every even element. Right? Cool. Pretty neat. And of type. So this is something even more powerful. I can say, let's grab every fifth element, but only of a certain type of element, because there may be other things mixed inside the markup. Right? So I can say, okay, grab the third paragraph inside whatever, but there might be a heading in there, interjected in between those paragraphs. So maybe there's a paragraph, a subheading, an H2, and then 2 more. So I'm like, I don't care about what other stuff's in there. Grab the third element where it's a paragraph. Why, really? You're going to need to do this? Yeah, you're gonna find stuff where you're like, yeah, I need to get that one and put a background element because they're gonna highlight it with a thing and make it clickable. And yep, you're gonna have to do it. You're gonna be like, oh, I think we learned something in CSS class where I don't have to put some crazy classes and make a mess of my HTML. You'll be the office hero. So we can also do this. We can do every third element of type P, right? And of course, by extension, I can also apply an offset to that. You're like, there's no way I'll ever need to do that. I'm telling you, it's going to cut. You're going to be scratching your head one day and you're going to, wait a minute, I can use a smarter selector, and you will save yourself all kinds of trouble. And of course, we can use odd or even as well. Okay? Structural pseudoclasses. So we can talk about, we can add target elements without putting a class on them, right? Just by their very nature of where they may sit in a collection of other elements in terms of the HTML structure. That's why we call them structural pseudoclasses. It gets better. So the first child of a parent element, right? We can talk about the last child. So maybe just the first paragraph. Maybe just the last paragraph inside a section, right? So you've often seen maybe you go and read maybe a blog article, and the first paragraph inside is maybe in larger print. So you can quickly scan the article and it's kind of like a quick blurb, and you're like, yeah, no, I'm not really interested in that. I don't want to learn about why Trump, shut down the U.S. government. I'm not that interested. Right? Go on to the next one. So so we don't have, and the thing is, I don't want to put a class on. Go inside my markup and put P class equal first. Of course, it's the first paragraph in that section. So we can talk about that by just targeting the first child or the last child. The last paragraph also we can target and style that differently. Maybe you want a thin, line along the bottom. So just put a border bottom, a thin black line underneath just the last paragraph to separate. And then maybe there's some comments in there or something like that. So those things seem a little abstract. You're like, why would I ever need that, right? We'll see. There are instances where we could use these. So we can also, maybe there's other things inside. Maybe we're looking inside an aside element, and there's a few subheadings or H3s and some paragraphs all jumbled together. So maybe it's not the first. So maybe it's not the first element inside the aside, but it could be the first of type H3. So maybe I want to ignore other elements of a certain type. We can certainly, and we can do last of type. Absolutely. Only child. This is a bit strange. So this is whereby if we have an element, and you're like, why do I need this? You will see instances as we build web applications with more kind of sophisticated functionality, where it might be important to know that a certain element only has one element, right? Maybe for error messages or different kind of things like that. So this is whereby an H2 element is the only child of an element. So the element only has an H2 in it, right? I don't know, maybe we're pulling in a Twitter feed in a panel on the side there, and it says Twitter feed. And if the Twitter feed breaks, we'll only have the H2 that says Twitter feed. And then maybe we want to do something with that panel to indicate that the Twitter feed is down or it's broken or something, right? Similar, we can say a paragraph that has a parent, so it's a child, but it's the only element inside that. Only of type. It gets stranger, right? And sure, these are a little bit obscure, but you need to know that these exist, right? Because you're going to wonder, you're going to come up with these strange kind of styling requirements, and you'll be like, I don't want to put in another div. I don't want to do some more markup. Or you may, sometimes you actually don't have access to the markup because maybe you're building a theme for a content management system, and you can't control the markup because the people who are contributing content are the ones generating it, right? So then in that case, you can't control the markup. It's not up to you. But you can control the CSS. So here's where we have a Q element that has a parent, but it is the only Q child, right? So where there's just one quote inside. an empty. This is a bit strange. And this might come in handy. Maybe you're outputting a table with you're connecting to a database and spitting out some, I don't know, some financials or something like that, and a certain cell in the table is empty. Maybe you want to gray that out, right? Or put one of those diagonal slashes through it. Why put an image inside that TD cell? This is great because it just says any empty cell in your spreadsheet. Just put a slash through it, and make it gray, right? So much easier. So much easier. Negation pseudoclass. This is weird. This gets weird. What do I mean by that? I mean not. So, we take the universal selector, which is star. That means everything. Everything that is not an anchor. So this would hit up anything on the page, any element that is not an anchor element. You're like, huh? I wouldn't want to use that. When am I going to need to use that? Yeah, again, it comes down to when you get specific kind of, you're programming little interactive little widgets. Sometimes there's going to be times when you want to style anything but not these things. Right? This kind of thing does come up from time to time. Pretty cool. And all of these selectors that I'm showing you have really, really good support. That's not always been the case. These work everywhere. We do not have to build hacks, or there was a time when we had to build all these crazy messy workarounds because the browsers didn't have good CSS support. But now you live at a time when they do. Pseudo elements. This is bizarre. So what I mean by a pseudo element, element, you know what an element is. You look at in your HTML, in your markup, we have an H1, we have an aside, a section, a main. Those are elements, right? And they may contain other elements inside them. A pseudo element. So that means it's sort of an element, but not really. What is going on here, right? Scott, I need an example. All right. Let's talk about the first line of a paragraph. And I call this a pseudo element because when you render a paragraph on the screen, say you render a paragraph on your phone, right? The paragraph may wrap to 5 lines. Okay? That's fine. So the first line, I can say, well, let's just style the first line of this paragraph. That's fine, but what if you go like that? Now, the first line is the first 10 words instead of the first 5 words. I can't mark that up with my HTML because I don't know how the document's going to wrap on a said user's screen. I have little to no ability to know what kind of screen the person is going to consume this content on. I don't know where the first line and the first starts and stops on a paragraph. It depends. So this is where I can use something like this, a pseudo element, to say the first line of content for this element, make it big, make it, double the size, maybe underline it, right? And then it will change as they do this with the turn your device to landscape and portrait. That'll change. It'll render on the fly. It's great. The only thing to note is we're using a double colon. Okay, that's for pseudo elements. And if you're working in, be careful with this, because if you're working in an outdated version, I think IE for desktop, if you're working with IE, it keeps changing. I think, well, it doesn't keep changing. I know I think it's IE 8 or older. You have to use a single colon for pseudo elements. So the pseudo elements largely work, but you can't use the double syntax in older versions of IE. Just to be aware. But we should be following current syntax. So I'd like to see the double. I'd like to see you using this, unless you're on a project where a significant number of your users, like a large bank, have outdated versions of IE. So you might come up against that. But you should use, for pseudo elements, we should be using 2 colons. And for pseudo classes, 1 pair of colon? No, 1 colon. Here's another one. The first letter of any paragraph element, as long as it is not preceded by any other element. Okay? Well, that's weird. So this is where you have a situation, where you have some, like a big letter like that. It says, perhaps, blah, 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 like this, right? So in the past, this paragraph we would have to put a div around this, or a span around this P in the word perhaps, right? In order to do this, and then size that span up, put it display block, so it's a box, and I could set the height and width and some padding or spacing around here or something. No, you don't need to do that. You're going to still see you're going to still see this in production work, and you're like, what a mess. Where they dump all this code inside just to achieve, this initial cap like this. Just do that, and you're done. Great support for it, right? As long as it's not preceded by any other elements. So, how do I do? As long as it's not preceded. So that would mean if inside the paragraph before this letter there was a span element or some other element inside that, this might break. So it has to be where there's just text inside that note. Before and after, this is cool. We saw this in the when we did that. If you're here for that the lesson where we're doing mobile and output small, medium, and large, right? So you can output a piece of content, and that's why it's important to set the character encoding, just like we do in the meta tag to UTF-8 for our character code for Unicode in our HTML. We're also going to do that in our CSS. Try to get into the habit of setting the character encoding in our CSS to Unicode, so we can put universal characters in here, or international characters from any number of character sets. So in this case, we use the pseudo element double colon thing, and so this means that before the H1, we'll put, this is actually before the element itself, it'll say note dash space, and that will actually generate that content and inject it into the screen. Before this came out, we could only use JavaScript. Yeah.
So if you do that, would it be then that node would be part of the H1? So it would be the H1 element?
As far as I understand, it's actually outside of the H1 and like literally before the element.
So how would you swap it? Would you just add like stuff after that and tell it how to?
Yeah, so inside those braces, you'd add other declarations, which would cover this content here. So it would style that, I think. That's a good question. Now you got me thinking again. Maybe does it go inside? I'm pretty sure, if I recall correctly, it's actually outside of the H1, but literally like bolted on right in front of it. I'll I'll double check just to make sure, because that could cause some rendering problems if it. But I seem to recall that's pretty easy to deal with CS. They designed it in a way that it works easily, not that it's a hassle. So, but I'll double check. I'll double check on the before thing. A little note. Okay, that's a good question. I like it. Thank you. In the same way, after, right? So you might think, that's kind of cheesy. I don't think I'll ever need to do anything like that. Yeah, you will. Yeah, you'll come up against stuff like that. You'll be like, and sometimes the answer, you could do that with JavaScript, right? We can manipulate the DOM, and that's what we're going to spend a fair bit of time doing in client-side scripting, is learning how to manipulate the HTML and the CSS with JavaScript-based interaction. But sometimes there's no need. You don't need to. Combinators. 403. Okay, move along as fast as I can. Combinators. So this is where, say I wanted to target a paragraph where it was directly descended from the body. So this says any paragraph element, not just the first one. This is any paragraph that is directly descended, so directly contained inside the body tag. So if I have a body tag and then a div and then a paragraph, this would not work. Only if the paragraphs are right inside the body in this case. So direct descendant combinator. Very useful. Sometimes called DOM style selectors. This gets a bit weird. adjacent and general sibling. So this means any paragraph element that is immediately follows an H2. So it has to be the one right after. If there's an H2 and then a paragraph and then a paragraph, and I wanted to get that one, this wouldn't work. This only grabs the one that immediately follows the H2. But they're both siblings because they're both inside, say, a section, for example. This is interesting. So the tilde, squiggly thing, that's the one up the top left. If you're way up near the escape key, a little squiggly up there, you gotta hit the shift to get it, right? So the squiggly, or it's called a tilde. So any paragraph element that shares the same parent, but doesn't. So this would get all the paragraphs that are a sibling of the H2, right? Not just the one that immediately follows. All right. Why don't we take a quick breather there, and then we'll get into the craziness that is attribute selectors. And after you go and find yourself a coffee, stretch, you know. And we're back. We just got a few more slides here before we get down to it, and we'll give it a try. Try our hands out. Okay. Where's my play button here? Attribute selectors. And in fact, I saw some of you guys use these in some of your work that you submitted to me from the last class. So I was like, well done. Way to go. It's good. These are considered a little bit more advanced. So, for example, if I wanted to target any anchor element, but it had to have the attribute href. You can say, wow, that's weird. Why would you have an anchor without an href? Well, we used to. Anchors were used for various other things. So maybe it might be more apt to then say, okay, yes, let's target an element where there's an attribute that equals a certain value. So if you wanted to say only target paragraph elements with the title intro, we can be very specific, right, about that attribute and that title. We're using the brackets, the square brackets, right? We can also say, okay, I don't necessarily know that whether or not the link will be an inbound URL, will be outbound. I don't know how. Maybe I'm working on a content management system and people are going to be hammering different strings into the href, so they'll be inconsistent. So I'm just going to say, okay, if the attribute href contains the string Georgian College anywhere, I want to color this link with a green background. And there you go. So we can use very smart, a little bit of what we call, I guess, regular expression, right? Which is a pretty advanced science in and of itself. I'm no regex master by any stretch, but it's pretty cool. So we can also look at, now we can say, okay, let's target, I only want to target links that are outbound from my site. So I don't care about links that are pointing into another page or section in the site with a relative URL, but if they contain the protocol HTTP or HTTPS, then I want to style them with one of those little boxes with little arrows so they know people click on that link, they're leaving the site. So I don't have to put a class in, I don't even have to put a rel equal external. Well, I should, but in my HTML, I can just target and say, oh, I know then I want to style outbound URLs or links differently than inbound links. Very simple. Begins with. That's called the caret character, by the way, in case for those interested. Likewise, we can also look at values ending with. So the $sign means, so any anchor where the value of the href ends with .pdf. Well, I know then that's a link to a PDF document. So maybe I want to put on the background, put a little padding to the right of that element and put a little PDF icon with a background image. Easy, right? Don't have to put anything inside my HTML. Just a smart selector. No problem. We can also say, well, I don't know. What if there's I'm looking with an element with a class, and oftentimes with an element, you can have an element that belongs to multiple classes. There's a space that may separate certain things. So we'll look at things like, for example, Modernizer is an interesting library that puts a whole series of classes on the HTML element that describe the capability of the browser. So what I can say is, okay, if one of the classes of a given label element is equal to error, then background will be pink, right? Or whatever, or underlined red. So, so if it contains that above class value, we can target. Okay, so let's give this a try. Let's see what this looks like by crunching some code here. So I'll escape out of here. You guys have access to this. So we go into Blackboard now. We'll go to Learning Modules, Module 1, Defining Selectors. This PowerPoint is yours. There you go. What we want to do is pull down the lesson files here. So I'm going to zoom up the text a little bit, small. Okay, so pull down our lesson files.zip. Put that in Module 1 for your keep your stuff organized. You'll thank yourself. It might be a good time also to remind you that if when someone bangs on my door and says my hard drive crashed, so I can't submit assignment 2 on time, I don't accept that as an excuse anymore. Why? Because we give you 100 gigabytes on OneDrive. Put your stuff there. It doesn't cost you any money, right? Backup is your responsibility. I want you to pretend right now that your hard drive is going to crash tonight. Like it's going to be toast. Will you be cool with that, right? The ice storm's going to come down, maybe take down the electrical grid, and as they spark it up again, you get a couple surges, boom, your hard drive's fried. Are you good? Or would you be toast? Right? So think about that. Make sure you're either using OneDrive with your Office 365, which we provide to you. Dropbox offers you quite a bit of space for free. Google Drive with your Google account offers you quite a bit. Maybe you can break up your stuff, but backing your stuff up to the cloud, that is your job. You are IT professionals, right? My computer crashed is no longer an excuse. Okay? Do it. Save yourself the tears. Right? Okay, so let's extract these zip files. Extract all. You can get rid of the underscore Mac OS 10. I still can't figure out a way to get rid of those weird system directories when I zip those up. So inside there we should have a folder called selectors. That's cool. Let's open up our handy dandy code editor. I've got excuse me, Visual Studio Code. Use whatever you want. I don't care. Vi, Vim, brackets, whatever you want. Open folder, there's that we want. Okay, so let's take a look at our indexed template here. Okay, well, we'll just work locally right now. We'll be working on the server on Azure maybe a little bit later, maybe using a repository, GitHub, pushing it to Azure, but not tonight. We'll just pull this down. Control O, open this up. Where are we here? Open up your index. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna head out here. First thing, just as a recap, of course, your doc type. Determine your base language on your HTML element. Always use the country code. Always your character encoding, unless you have a really good reason for using something other than Unicode. 8-bit. Put UTF-8 in there. Save yourself a lot of pain. Right? Remember, 11 years. It took 11 years for a bunch of really smart people, men and women, to figure out a character set that included most of the world's characters used by most of the people most of the time. 11 years. Use it. It's yours. It's free. So this is cool. Notice I've got I don't even know what kind of accent that is. I think that is, I don't know what, I think it's called a diacritic or something like that. I don't know. So anyway, the rendering of that character will be handled by UCFH, right? We've attached an external style sheet. We're going to be doing some styling, so that will be styles.css inside the styles directory, so that's cool. Oops. And I've got a head section, the body. Inside the body I have an article with a class on it. That's about a primary heading. Whoops, primary heading H1, some paragraphs, a section, an aside with an unordered list, a UL. I'm going to turn the word wrap on here. A little longer, I don't have the screen. And then we close out the aside, close out the article, close body, close the HTML. So before I go headlong into CSS, what I just gave you a chunk of HTML. What do you do with that? Yeah. Don't trust me. You know, I know I got a big smiling face up here, and I seem to know something about code. Don't trust. I can make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Check it out. Validate your code. Good. I didn't make any mistakes. Actually, I took this from the textbook and it kind of added a few other things, so I could have made mistakes, but I did not. That's good. So now we can confidently charge ahead with our HTML. And I don't care how long you do CSS stuff. 9 times out of 10, I'm telling you, people come knock on my door going, I can't figure out this CSS problem. It's not a CSS problem. It's an HTML problem. There's a problem. The CSS is doing its best, but it can only do so much when the HTML it's trying to style is broken. Right? Validate your HTML. You're going to find your problems are mostly in your markup. It's, it may sound strange, but it's true. Okay, let's head over into styles.css. Notice right off the bat, I'm setting the character encoding right in my CSS. That is the exact same thing as your meta char set, right? It's the same as line 4, except that's what it looks like in CSS. That needs to be right at the top of your CSS file if you intend on outputting anything using your CSS. You should probably just do it anyway. It doesn't do any harm, and it can potentially do a whole lot of good. So set your character encoding in your CSS. All right, let's take a look first at our named selector. So oftentimes now, I want you to get into the habit of, with our CSS, I want you to begin to get in the habit of organizing your CSS. I want to see comments in your code, and that means your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript. Good code, for the most part, is as much comments as it is code. Right? It makes it easy for people to work with. So that's what we're going to first start with, named selectors. Okay? And oftentimes you're going to see a heading like that, and then you'll see something like that, and then end of selector. So you've kind of got a little bit of a horizontal rule. Wherever you're at, in terms of your wherever you're working, they're going to have like code standards. So they're like, okay, when you're producing code for this app or this project, this is what your code commenting looks like in HTML. This is what it looks like in JavaScript. This is what, just do as the Romans do, right? They'll tell you what you adhere to those coding standards. So, but I want you to get into the habit of organizing your code. So a name selector. That's first of all. No tricks. We'll just do the H2. We'll target our H2, and we'll set the color. Maybe it's remember it's it is spelt American. red, green, blue. Color it red. Or you can use a keyword. We'll get into colors. This course too, I'll talk about the different ways of specifying color in CSS. Different flexible ways we can do that. It's pretty cool. So this is specifying if we're using what are called typically the web safe colors, where these are in hexadecimal. So the first two colors are 00 to FF, hexadecimal, base 16. So this is the first triplet is red, green, blue. Where these are the same, these are the same, and these are the same, you can collapse them into 3 characters. It's just shorthand. Okay, that's why you'll sometimes see that. Save that. We'll know that everything's working. If we refresh our page, and you'll see indiscriminately, that rule targets any H2. ID selectors. If you're using a kind of a horizontal rule type of organization, I'm going overboard with this just to kind of get you into the habit. Make sure the length of these rules, these horizontal rules, have the same number of characters, so they're not like different lengths. Take pride in your code. Think this is craftsmanship. You are hand building code, right? Make it beautiful, man. Your code should be beautiful as well as your interfaces. Everything should be beautiful. Jenna.
For colors with hexadecimal, is there a way to do transparency for that? Like, I know you can do with RGB values, you have RGB.
Yep.
Is there a way to do that with hexadecimal?
No, Hex doesn't have that feature. It doesn't have an alpha channel in it. Yeah. That's where we would go to RGB alpha or HSL, hue saturation, luminosity, alpha, HSL-A. Except in this case, since you're coloring the foreground color, you could just say, you could add the opacity. Like that. So, in short, you can sort of do it, but you have to do it in 2 steps. Right? So that would be, make it 40%, 40% opaque. Good question, but we'll get into. Don't worry, we'll give you all the lowdown on color and specifying and all that kind of thing, and the things you can do with it. So ID selector. So in this case, I don't know why this code it won't give me tabbed based navigation. I open up. You can see this. Does anyone else have this in? If I double click this, it doesn't do that on my Mac version. They differ. I thought they were the same. Oh, thank you. I learn something every day. It's cool. All right. So let's go over here. So we'll take a look at an ID selector. So if you style something with an ID and 2 things are targeted by that style, you have invalid HTML. You can only have 1 element with a particular ID value. It's like a serial number, right? So in that case, so we can just say ID Gaudi, you spelled right. And we'll just set the color to orange. So ID Gaudi, where's the element with the ID Gaudi? Where did I put it?
You can have multiple classes though, right?
You can have multiple classes. Yeah, absolutely. So for example, this section, you can see here we have 2 elements with the class project. That's cool. You can also have an element can belong to multiple classes with a space separated list. But ID is different. ID is like a serial number.
Right.
Only one. There can be lots of elements with the ID attribute, but only one of that value.
That's per page though, right?
That's right, per document. Correct. Not if you got a web app where you're spitting out different templates,
Right.
you go to a different template, you're fine. I like to think about it like the automobile kind of thing. Like you can have a Honda Civic, that's the class, but the VIN number on your the insurance needs to know that's your ID.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we save that. Control S and head over here, reflog the page here, I haven't added an ID, have I? I don't think I've added an ID. So if I then add the ID onto this H1, for example, so keep your HTML, and this is, and as you're building the front end for your app, it's helpful if you go back, like I am right now. I'm going back to edit the HTML template. I could introduce errors in my HTML after having validated it. Then I go back to my CSS, and my CSS doesn't work. Go back and validate. If you've made some changes to your HTML, go back and check that again, right? Yeah. You can totally mess with your own mind that way. You're like, what's going on, right? So, and there we go. So that would now be. So a couple of ways. So I can do that either like that, or in this case, if I want, I can do H1 Gaudi. I guess real purists, that'll do the same thing. I guess real purists would say, really technically, I'm making that more complicated than I need it to be. There is only one element with that particular value, so that's what you should, and I respect that, I get it. But now if I'm just privy to the CSS, I'm like, now I don't know what element to look for. Right. All right, class selector. Let's go over here and look at. So if I wanted to target something with a class, right? Let's go over here to the aside here, and I could say class equal about. Right. So add that to the aside element on line 25 of your HTML. Head over into styles, dot about. Set the color to, I don't know, light blue. So save both the style sheet and the now what? How come the whole thing? Well, look at this. So not only did it make the color of the article and that color inherited, so all of these, so you can see, well, here we go. So we can see because that the whole article element was class about, what happened was I didn't need to add that class in there because it already inherited from the parent, right? So I can go back here and say, well, I didn't need to add this class about here. I can remove that from the aside. Class about. I'm going to change this. Let's save this. Probably light blue is a bit hard to read. Save, and I'll change this to, I don't know,
Dark blue.
dark blue. There you go. Dark slate blue. That looks like a purple to me. That doesn't look like slate blue. Dark blue. There you go. So all of the children of that element, so some, again, we talk about this, the cascade, some of these, like color, text, which is text color or foreground color, that inherits. So this unordered list, this bulleted list inherited from the parent element where I set the dark blue. That's all right. Class. All right. Let's get into contextual selectors. Okay, so a contextual selector speaks to, sorry, yes? Question?
Is there a way to just target or select the bullet itself? Like, for example, if you wanted to blue text and then still keep a black bullet.
Oh, yes, and I forget how.
I actually had somebody ask me
Yes.
that question at the Ladies Are Rainbow workshop on Saturday. She's like, how do I choose bullets?
The kind of quick and dirty way to do that would to be set the list style display to none, so turn off the bullets and use a background image on the list item off to the side and put it, or use an image, list style image instead of the bullet, and make it whatever you want. But yes, there is a way to change the color of that, and I forget how. I'll find that out. That's a good question. I used to know how to do that. I can't remember now. Color.
It's a big workaround. I just looked it up.
It's not straightforward.
Not at all.
No.
You have to have like 6 more different selectors.
That's all right. Text. All right. I like these questions. That's cool. You guys are thinking. Okay, so a contextual selector. Let's say we wanted to target a paragraph, in an article with the class about. So this is what this is how I would do it. So I would go like this. I would say article dot about space P.
So sorry, that's saying just the paragraphs in the article with the class about?
That is saying just paragraphs that are descended from. So if you notice, this is really cool. The way this is Visual Studio Code for Windows, but I really like this. So you mouse over the selector, and it shows you the markup that it would actually target, which is really cool. So this is, it could be directly inside.
Right.
What it's saying, this is just, you're just saying it's a descendant. So if it's contained by an article, however many layers up, with the class about, this, whatever you style in here, will target that.
Okay.
Right, so we'll say color green. Using some nasty colors just to actually let's keep it simple for now. Let's get rid of the article there. Okay, so we can just say class, and you can see when I mouse this over, element. This is any element, right, with the class about that contains a paragraph. Let's start there, and then we'll work backwards, and I'll show you specificity and how that works with the CSS. So save that, and if we head over here, reload the page, and you can see all of these paragraphs here are green. Right? Let's go back to look at our markup. So inside our article element here, we have, inside the article element, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraph elements. So they should all be green, which they are. Okay?
Where was your post tag for?
Oh, hang on a sec. I don't have this. I don't have the pixels on my projector that you have on your monitor. This one here. Is this what you're looking for?
No, for the article.
Oh, the article is the whole, pretty much the whole thing. So it starts here, all the way here, and I close it out
Okay.
right at the end. Yeah.
You stopped it before and it's like, wait, what? Where's the...
Yeah. So, so what I want, what I can do here is I can say, well, if I do this article dot class about P above here, and I say color, I don't know, pink. Not that you should do this. I'm just trying to learn about. So if I do that, what color are they going to be? Green or pink?
Pink is more specific.
It's more specific. So even though so even though it's earlier in the stack, so in this order, because this selector is more particular. This says any element would be about a class about. If it contains a P, that P is screen. This is any, and I find it helpful to read them backwards. I don't know why, it's the way my brain works. Any paragraph element contained by an article with the class about. So in this case, that specificity will win the day, even though it's not latest in the stack. Now, the interesting thing here is if I was to do this, if I was to say article P. So if I'm not using a class or an ID, right? In fact, selectors with IDs, ID moves an element up in the specificity score, right? Class is more specific than an ID, but a contextual selector here, this is the least specific. Although it is specific, it says any article with the element P, and I can say, I don't know, right? So even though this is latest in the stack, this will not render. It will not win because it is the very least. It is the least specific of these three selectors. So specificity matters. How specific you are matters. But you should only be specific as you need to be. No more specific. It's a bit of a, there's a bit of an art to it. It takes time. It takes practice. Okay, I'll move through. We'll go a little bit quicker. Okay, let's go into grouped selectors. So the group selector, let's color the H1 and the H2, both. So say they have the same same kind of styling. We'll change the, I don't know, let's text transform uppercase. Color gray, and let's also set them to font family sans serif. So instead of writing all three of those things twice for the H1 and then again for the H2, don't repeat yourself. Save your bandwidth, save your fingers, save your typing. That will target both of the H1 and the H2. Notice how the H1 is not gray, right? Even though the color here says H1s are gray. Why?
Because H1 already has the specific selector.
Yeah. That's a more specific selector, IDs. IDs are very powerful, right? That's why we should be using IDs very sparingly in our HTML. Only put an ID or a class in your HTML if you need it. Don't.
Have an ID, though.
Hmm?
H2 doesn't have an ID.
H2 does not have an ID. That's right.
So it's quality.
So this one, so up here, the H2 is supposed to be red,
Okay, yeah.
but it's gray here because this is later in the stack.
Right, okay. Cool.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of things at play here, which you kind of have to, it's almost like a game of poker, right? You're trying to constantly figure out how this algorithm is going to work, right? So it's a number of things that come into play that determine ultimately which of those rules win the day, right? When there's a conflict. Yeah. But don't when you're building your HTML, don't just start hammering in IDs and classes thinking, oh, this will make my CSS easier. No. It's a last resort. You only put that stuff in if you need to. There's nothing wrong with putting it in. Just usually you can use something like this, and that will do the job. think about semantics, think about meaning first. Design your markup around the meaning of the content, then the CSS will have its own kind of, it will make sense enough. You should be able to use contextual selectors without IDs or classes for the most part. Yeah, yeah. Simple, 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 simple. Keep it simple, stupid. Use the KISS principle with HTML and CSS and JavaScript too, right? It's going to get complicated enough on your own. Trust me, it really will. Okay, so group selectors. You know, if I have another, do I have an H3 in here? I don't think I do. No. Yeah, no, I don't. So I could do, you know, if H3s come along, if anyone adds them in, I can add them in just like that, right? No problem. Okay, so group selectors, that's cool. Pseudo class selector for link states. Pseudo class selector. All right, so we'll build one and then we'll copy it. So we'll do the A pseudo class link. Open that up. Color, I don't know, hot pink. So copy that, and I want you to paste that 4 more times. Oops, made a bit of a mess. There. Remember the Star Wars, what do you call that? Is that an anagram? Is that anagram? Is that right? Acronym. Acronym. Or, yeah, acronym. Lord Vader, former handle Anakin. How's that for a? That'll mess with your head. Lord Vader's former handle Anakin. Link visited focus hover active. Okay. Let's, if they're visited, let's change it to purple. On focus, let's change it to, I don't know, lime green, just so we can't miss it. Lime green, or lime. That's a new one. I thought it was just lime green. Okay. On hover, let's set the, let's set it to, I don't know, yellow. We won't miss that. And then on active, we'll change this to red, so we won't miss that. Cool. Save that up. Reload the page. And then we'll see we have a link here. Now this is an outbound link. I know it's an outbound link because if I mouse over it, the status bar down here gives me the URL. Okay, so it's pink because it hasn't been visited yet. So a link is, you can swap that in your mind with a unvisited, hot pink, right? If I click through on that, right, this is now in my browsing history. So if I head back, it is now purple. It's now visited. And since this is later in the stack than this one, it's purple. That's the way the cascade works. Now, what I want you to do is now go back to the browser, click in the address bar here so that that has focus, and then hit the tab key. And again, keep tabbing until that link has focus. And you can tell this is actually the outline property. It's not the border property, it's the outline property of the element. That in this browser, this operating system, it would be, yours may look different depending on your OS and your browser. It might be dotted black or dotted orange, or I don't know. So that focus, and if I go shift tab to tab back out of there, so the focus cascades over the visited color. Why? Because that class is then added, and this color is later. This is later than this one in the stack, right? Now hover over. While it's focused, hover over it. The reason why focus is, or hover is after focus, is because that element might have focus, but you want the mouse action to, you want also that to register to the user. And then of course when I hover, when I click, but before I release it, so it's on click, because the browser follows the default action of the hyperlink is to follow the href value, which is the outbound URL on release. As long as that release is happening while hover is still true. If I click mouse out and release, it does not follow the href. Only while I click down, active state, release, it then goes back quickly to the hover state, and then the user agent follows the href. It's designed that way for usability. These are all these things we don't think about, right? That's the idea. We have to think about it because the end user doesn't want to, nor do they care. That's our job now to figure this stuff out. Really? Someone had to think about that. That's your job to think about this stuff. It's your job to sweat these little details. There we go. So there's a pseudo class selectors. You can also, you don't have to just be target, say, for hover, the hover pseudo class. You can also do h1 hover. Right? So anytime I guess that was a bad choice of color, wasn't it? Right? So it's not just it's not just anchors that you can capture that kind of interaction, or that pseudo class. Next we go structural pseudo class selector. Structural pseudo class selector. Grab my horizontal rule up here. Okay, we're gonna kind of get crazy here now. So watch this. Let's take a look at, let's say I want this may sound crazy. So let's look at our index.html. So here we have a list, an unordered list, and we have list items, right? Let's say I want every third list item in this UL inside this aside element. I don't want to target list items that are in other elements, just inside here. I want to target every third one, but I want to start with the second one. Really? We can do that. Oh yeah, we can. Here we go. So we're going to say, okay, remember we wanted it inside the aside, and then we'll say UL, and then I'll say li colon nth dash child. And then I'll say every third one, or the third one, and then 3n means every third one. So 3n is the, so 3, 6, 9, so on is the pattern. But I want to start offset by 1. Start at number 2. Start at the second one. And then open that up. I'll say background dash color light blue. So a number of things that are going on here. We're using the structural pseudoclass selector here, but I'm also combining this with a contextual selector. So I'm saying only in the situation whereby this Li finds itself as a child of a UL, which finds itself as a child of an aside.
Do we have to put the UL in there as well, or is it, can we just put aside Li?
I like that. I like that question. No. No, you don't. This would be, in fact, if we have an Li and you've built proper HTML, you should have an Li, or UL as its parent. So that would even make more sense. Unless you need to be more specific, because there's a conflicting rule maybe later that you need to override. So sometimes you do that for specificity's sake. Good question. So say that, refresh the page. And now, every third list item is light blue with the background. Starting at the second one, -1, offset by 1.
Is there a way to control just the part that's covered with text? See how it's kind of going off into the white space there too?
I'm not sure. Maybe I don't understand the question.
So in the list items,
Yeah.
it has the blank, like the sort of negative spaces after the text. So the first one, for example, the first
Yep.
one covered blue. The first one covered blue.
Mhm.
Yeah, at the end of that sentence there's a big string of empty
Blue.
space.
Yes.
Is there a way to cut it
Just
off?
target the text?
Yeah.
Yeah, you would put a span element, an inline element inside the Li, because an Li is a block level element. So it's going to be a box. It's going to be, and you can see that by, like I can do this.
Right.
It's a box, right? What I could do is I could change that list item to display inline. Yeah, because display block would be then like just a box and there's stuff in it. Inline is where the element itself is like it displays and only that's not a very good explanation. Okay, so we can also do just capturing the odd ones. So we can just say aside li nth dash child. Gotta spell it right. Odd. I don't know. So this is any list item that finds itself as a descendant of an aside element and only grab the odd numbered ones. The first, the third, so on and so forth. So what about first child? Let's take a look at that one. So let's say that we want to target the first paragraph inside the about the. So go to my markup here. So we have the article with the class about. Say I want to target the first paragraph here inside it. No other paragraph, just the first one. Okay. So what I do is here, I go in here and I say, okay. We say dot class about, And then I can go descendant selector, or I could say, let's leave that for now. Let's say P pseudo class selector, P first dash child. Light salmon. Ah, there you go. Crazy colors. So save. So this is, so any paragraph, the first child that that is a paragraph. Refresh the page. And it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work?
I think it might just be too close to pink.
So the paragraph is not the first child of the article the class about the H1 is. So that fails, right? So if let's move on to, let's go down and say for first child, what about the list item here? I can choose the first child list item inside the UL here. So let's try something else. Let's say we can go here, we can say aside UL li first dash child. And I can say font weight bold. Save that. And then, of course, this is the first element li, element of type li, and it is the first child. So if you're using first child, it actually has to be the first element inside a container. In this case, the UL.
So in that case, you would need the UL, not the last time.
In this case, yeah. In this case, I would need the UL. Yeah. In this case, I'm also being more specific and saying, but only where that UL is a.
Right.
Yeah. Crazy times. Last child, I can do the same thing. Copy that rule. And change this to last child. I'll change this to font style italic instead. There it is. So that is the last child of that UL parent. So it's italics. First of type and first and last of type. So let's take a look at the section elements. If we look at the sections in here, so inside the article, I have an H1, a paragraph. Then I have two section elements. 1, 2, right? I can target this section. What I want to do is target the section element, but only the first section element that I find inside the article element. Okay? It doesn't have to be the first child. It just needs to be the first child or the first element of a certain type. So the first instance of a section inside the article. So how do I do that? So I can do like this. I can say article space section first of type. say border 3px dotted red. And now we only get the border on the first section, because that's the first instance of a section inside the article, first of type. We can copy that and do the last of type as well. I've only got 2 of them, so I guess it's not. Change to blue. So this is the last of element type section inside the article, so it gets blue. Very easy to target. Okay? Instead of putting classes or IDs or anything like that in your code, just look about see if you can find a selector that describes what it is you're looking for and use it. Cool. Pseudo elements. All right, what do we got? 5:19. Why don't we take a 5-minute break, let you get up and stretch. I'm going to go through our pseudo elements, and then I'm going to look at attribute selectors, and then we're all done. I'll set you loose, so not too much longer to go. Okay, get up, stretch, get some water, move around, get the blood flowing. Okay, cool. Let's take a look at now our pseudo elements, which are kind of crazy. Pseudo element selectors. Oops, that's not what I wanted. So say I want the first line of a paragraph. Paragraph, 2 colons this time. First line. So this means any first line. The first line of any paragraph element. I'll say, let's say background color light gray. Not that this is very practical, but you get the idea. So pseudo elements, pseudo classes is a single colon, pseudo classes is single, pseudo elements are the double colon. So I'd like you to use that standard syntax. If it breaks on your browser, we'll take a look at it, but I want you to get into that habit. So let's refresh this and see and there we go. Now, the whole paragraph is highlighted, so let me crunch this down a bit. Now you can see, so that's very useful because the first line, how many words comprise the first line, depends on the width of the screen and how those words are wrapping. So you may have to kind of compress your screen a little bit to see first line. It's not very readable, is it? No. Yeah. Oh, what the heck? Dark gray. That's a bit easier. There you go. Cool. First letter. Let's say the paragraph first letter. We want to do one of those fancy historiated capitals or large caps, initial caps. Let's say font dash size 200%. Let's really crank it up. Whoops. If we wanted to sit down in the text there, we can also float it to the left. You'd have to do a little bit more finessing to kind of fit that just so inside your, but you get the idea, right? Other than if you want to do that before we had this kind of pseudo element, we'd have to go in there, surround the first letter with a span element, put a class on there, call it first letter, go in our CSS, go p dot first letter, and then all that. You got crazy. Now we can just do this, and we're good to go. I love it. It's awesome. We can also generate content. So I can say h1 before. Use the content property. I can say note. And I can also do, of course, h1 after. Put an exclamation point there.
So if it's being styled, would it not be part of the H1 element, even though it's before and after? It's following the same style rule?
It seems to be the case here because, for example, up above here, well, for example, yeah, so it's orange.
And it's uppercase.
And it's uppercase. Notice, yeah. What did I put here? Yeah, it's up. Maybe we answered our question. Also, it's when I put when I hover, it's hovering. It's not like, well, I guess maybe that's not helpful because it's display block. If I did it display in line, that might tell us. Okay, hang on a sec. Let me just try something. I'm going to change the H1 to, where's my H1?
The ID second one.
Oh, Gaudi. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to say display. Because it's display block, the hover is a box anyway. Yeah, it's now internal to the element. So I guess we answered our question. Yeah. Which I think that makes sense from yeah, in my mind. I'll get rid of that. That was just for fun. Where am I at? Where am I at? Down here. Okay. Well, content after. Okay, so before and after. Combinators. Okay, let's move on to combinators. A little comment here. Combinators. So we can do the direct descendant. So I can say article. Let's take a look at my markup for a second here. Article about. Yeah, so say I want to target only paragraph elements. So for example, here is a paragraph element inside the section element, right? Okay? there's also but these three paragraphs, or these two paragraphs here, here and there. Where's my other one? Oh no, there's two that are inside the section, and then there's two that are sibling to the section elements themselves. So say I only want to target paragraph elements that are directly descended from the article. I don't want where they're descended from, but not inside there. So what I can do then is I can go into and I can say paragraph, or I can say article directly descended P. Right? I'm running out of diagnostic colors here, so I don't know. What else can I do to the crazy paragraphs? Border, 5px, dashed, teal. How's that? Here we go. I like it. How's that? So this will only target, it won't hit all four of those paragraphs, just the ones that are directly descended from the article element. Just these two, not these two. I know the page is starting to look like a bit like a dog's breakfast, but we're just having fun. So that's a very good way to, you can isolate certain elements and talk about how deeply nested they are with the direct descendant. We can also say, let's say, what if we want to target a paragraph that is an immediate sibling to another paragraph? So I can use the adjacent sibling selector. I can say article P plus P. So what this means is any paragraph that is a direct is the next adjacent sibling. Color red. I'll use another color black. So which paragraphs will be colored black? None. Why? I broke something. What did I break? Oh, it wasn't. It's not specific enough. I'll do article class about. There. Now I won the specificity battle. So this one, because it's an adjacent sibling to this one, right after it is black. This one here is not an adjacent sibling to this one. They're in different section elements. So that won't work. You're like, come on, Scott, when am I ever going to use something like that? You will, trust me. You'll be like, oh, wow, thank goodness there's a selector like that. Totally saved my day, right? You'll find it. And the fact that you're seeing it now, you'll walk away and forget most of this stuff. That's cool, right? I expect that. You're going to need to see things 3 to 5 times before they begin to like saturate into your brain, and you're like, oh yeah, there's something for that, right? But that's when you really cement in your mind. When you come up to a situation, you're like, I need to do this. And then you kind of rediscover it in the MDN selector, and you're like, oh yeah, cool, that's exactly why that's there. And off you go.
What would happen if there was like a slew of 6 or 7 like P elements?
Yep.
With just like the last 6 be black?
Yeah. So if I add another, I'll show you. I'll grab here. I'll just. Because each one of those are an adjacent sibling to a prior one. So
right.
That remains true then. Yeah.
So you can use I guess you have to do the end variable if you wanted to use a different variation as opposed to all the last ones except the first.
You got it. Yeah. Okay. Craziness. All right. Adjacent sibling. What's another one? Is what's it called? I can't remember what it's called now. So let's say article dot about, and we'll say, oh, general sibling. So we use tilde p. So that means just generally any p that's a sibling to another p. I don't know.
So if any of our final projects turn out looking like this, how excited are you gonna be?
No, I'll feel honored. You were inspired by my incredible design skills with
Oh, I see
CSS.
that.
Wow, this guy can really design. He is a.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's huh. Yeah, I can. That's all right. I'll have to go back and I'll just clip that out with the little video editing from courtesy of YouTube. Okay, so general sibling selectors. Doesn't necessarily have to be adjacent to it. Okay, so let's we'll go to the attribute selectors. We'll show you one crazy selector, and then I'll let you go. So we can also talk about we can also look at the attributes. If there are attributes in the markup, we can use those to our advantage. So let's say we have a section element. I only want to target section elements whereby they have a class attribute. So I can just say sorry, what is it? Oh yeah, attribute selectors. Nope. So I can say section, square bracket, class. So this means if a section has an attribute class, background, yellow. Okay, sure enough, yeah, they get that property because they both have the section class, or the attribute named class. So to get more specific, then, let's go into our markup. We have an anchor here. Anchor. href. Let's say we wanted to target an anchor with an href. Anchor, attribute selector, whoops, not square bracket, href, where it equaled or it began with. So you use the caret selector, begins with, is equal to http. Oops. Watch your syntax. Easy to. And we can say, oh, I don't know. Powder blue. Never seen that one. There you go. So this way I could target any links that are outbound. So only links that where the href value begins with that are heading outbound, right? I wouldn't do this. I might, but And these links here are all outbound, so they get targeted with that background color light blue. Ah, it's looking like a mess now. It's crazy. We can also imagine what would be very particularly helpful is what if we had a, say we have, because we can change our base language. So our base language on the page here is language equal English. You can change that within the document. For example, this here is in Spanish. So I put the lang equal ES, right? And then I can use this language attribute, which is important for usability. Like if it's in a screen reader, I want this to be read in Spanish. My Spanish isn't very good, so I don't know if I'll attempt that. But you want the screen reader to read it with using that language. So I can now benefit by using that in the CSS and saying, oh great, I can say, okay, so any H2 whereby the or let's do the universal selector. Let's say anything, right? Whereby the lang attribute, let's say we'll use tilde, contains Spanish. And we'll say, I don't know. I'll just do something silly here just so we can see it. It's working. Okay, so that's any element, the star selector, whereby the lang attribute contains ES. And there we go. We can target them and do something interesting. I'm not sure you would do that with them, but you could do something stylistically. But yeah, so that's good. That's you can use ends with if you want with dollar signs. So you can use some just different operators. We'll show you one more here, and then I'll cut you loose. So it can get really, really crazy. So we can combine all these things if we need to. Okay, so let's just imagine, watch this one just for fun. Dot project H2 selector lang equals, or let's say lang equals quote ES. I'll use the adjacent selector plus paragraph DM. What in the heck does that mean? Right? Read it backwards. Try and figure out what emphasis element will be styled. Right? Outline. Put something crazier. So read it backwards. Any emphasis element, right, that is contained, that is descended from a paragraph element, which is itself an adjacent sibling to an H2 element that contains the ES, the language attribute that is exactly equal to ES, that is itself a descendant from an element with the class project. You're like, I will never write a selector like that. Really? Wait and see. Sometimes you'll get handed HTML and you can't change the HTML. So you have to do acrobatics with your CSS selectors to target something because you may be working in an application where the HTML is generated. It's a template. You can't change it, but you desperately need to style something. This is where you use the magic of CSS selectors, right? So I'm not saying you should ever build a selector like that if you don't have to, but you can, right? It's pretty cool. And there's more. There's even more of these different selectors that we can use that are coming online. These are like the kind of the main tools you'll have in your toolbox to target elements so that we can apply styles. Okay. So for a couple things I'd like you to do to take home. Unfortunately, usually week one I don't have time to get into the lab because, but I'll give you a good primer on how I plan to get that into class today, but we always run out of time. So I've given you an index.html, and here what I want you to do is this is called the Zen Garden Reloaded. So I want you to take a look at this markup, much in the way we've done in class now, and I want you to try and build selectors. So set all H3 elements to the color red, color green, all paragraph elements that belong to class intro. So all text inside the section with the ID requirements, so ID selectors. Then I want you to get into first line selectors, attribute selectors, group selectors, direct descendant selectors, first paragraph, so pseudo classes, every background color every third paragraph element to light blue, last paragraph element in every section. I'll show you. So try and get as many of these as you can, right? And I'm going to give you, it's going to be the end of the day, but I'll give you till the end of class, so next week to turn this in.
Are you supposed to be able to click and download your HTML file for that?
You should. Is it ne marche pas? Right. If you go right click and hit save link as, otherwise you'll get the Blackboard. It'll choke and hack, and you'll get some weird output. So right click, save it as, and I'll save it to my desktop, and I'll show you what it looks like. I'll show you what it should look like, so you know. Oops. Control open. There you go. So I've named all the challenges. So inside here, I've put some comments in here to just kind of coach you along through each of those challenges. So put the selector in here and the styles. So instead of an external CSS, I'll just have you put it embedded in the head section just to keep everything neat and tidy. Submit the completed index.html for your credit for the lab. So there is, I got to get rid of this H group. H groups are, I've had that in some of my code. They're actually not valid anymore. They're an old element. They might come back. So there's there's a section, there's a heading group. You can still use the heading group though. There's a couple of sections inside the section at the top. Another section with some sections. So sections within sections and footers within sections and sections within navs, right? So I want you to try and do your best. Don't add stuff to the HTML. Try and use the selector to target the element and style it that way. It's fun. It's a cool little puzzle. So submit that. Also, read Chapter 9, Defining Selectors, from your textbook. There's a suggested reading here from MDN, Mozilla Developer Network. So just leaf through this. It's just so you get a sense of, and bookmark this page for CSS selectors, so it's at your fingertips. Take the quiz. It's a short quiz, not very long. And next week we're on to typography. Okay? Hope you enjoyed. Be safe out there.